Hello everyone, welcome back to another YouTube video. Today is going to be a fun one and probably another long one because I don't know how to make a YouTube video without talking for at least an hour. Maybe one day I'll be able to make short YouTube videos, but I have a feeling today is not that day. Today is, shocker, another Percy Jackson video, but it's a little bit different than other ones we've done in the past. Today we are going to specifically be talking about why Rick Riordan does not like the Percy Jackson movies. I feel like this is something that a lot of people have a misconception of in many ways, so we're going to talk about it. And it's gonna be a fun time. So on November 16th of 2018, so a long time ago, Rick made a blog post where he essentially talked about his experience with the movies, specifically the first one, The Lightning Thief. And I feel like a lot of people don't really know about this blog post. I'll link the entire blog post in my description of this video so you can go and read it, even though I'm pretty much going to be reading most of it here in this video. But I think that this blog post is really interesting to read, especially now with having the full Percy Jackson TV series being out, seeing how it was adapted for the TV series. It's just really interesting because when Rick wrote this blog post, there was no plan yet, at least, to readapt Percy Jackson. It might have been very vaguely in the talks somewhere at Disney, but every mention in this blog post of a reboot of the franchise is incredibly hypothetical. So in retrospect, it's really fascinating to see his opinions on what they changed in the movie and just like how they adapted his book as a whole, especially now that we have a second adaptation to compare it to. So in this blog post, he talks about his experience with the people involved with the movie. He talks about things he liked and he talks about things that he didn't like, and he's very specific about the things he didn't like. You'll see, we have a lot to talk about, so let's go ahead and get into it. So something that I think is really interesting is that this blog post starts out with Rick talking about how he has zero control over any adaptation that has ever been made or will ever be made of Percy Jackson. The rights to Percy Jackson were basically already signed away before The Lightning Thief was ever even published. He talks about how his contract was a very standard Hollywood contract, where basically Hollywood controls all things and all decisions about the movie, and that the author may or may not be consulted, but he in no way has to be. And he talks about how basically, contrary to popular belief, every author has way less influence and control over their movies than you think they do. Like, yes, even people like Suzanne Collins, Stephenie Meyer. I think that the general public likes to believe that authors have a lot of control over their stuff being adapted, but they tend to not have as much control as we think they do. Authors not having a lot of control in their adaptations is actually something that's not talked about on purpose, because it's always in the best interest of the studios to make it seem like everybody is super happy with the adaptation that they're doing. And it's always in the studio's best interest to make it look like everybody was super involved and is happy with the outcome, even if they aren't. So in this blog post, Rick talks about how he was consulted at certain points during the writing process of this movie, and he did his best to give his feedback, which we see later on in the blog post. He shares his emails with the producers of The Lightning Thief to try and give us a sense of what he was trying to do behind the scenes when it comes to the movie. He does say, though, that eventually, once he saw the final script of the film, he realized that he needed to take a step away, for his own peace of mind. He also says in his blog post that he never saw the movies in their final form, and so what he knows of the movies and how he judges them is based off of his experience with the producers and what he saw of the final script. He talks about the hypothetical possibility of a new Percy Jackson adaptation, and he says, "Should a reboot happen someday in some fashion, I would hope, like you, that it would be a great adaptation that is faithful to the books and fun to watch. The fact that Disney has now acquired the rights from Fox may be hopeful news, but it doesn't change my contractual powers, which are zilch. Still, I've let it be known that I would be happy to consult and advise if they want me and if the new project was undertaken by a completely different team than the one which made the movies. I think that would be important, fresh eyes, fresh ideas. Hopefully, it will be people who know and are passionate about the books. I have no desire to go through my first experience again and see the same results. If I felt like that was going to be the case, I would have to stay away from the project completely. In the future, if some project actually does get underway, I may not be able to comment on it for contractual reasons, but you can tell how I'm feeling about it by what I do or don't say. Am I talking about it, promoting it, sharing cool things? I'm probably happy. Am I completely ignoring it and never mentioning it on social media? Yeah, that's probably not a good sign. For instance, check out my website. Do you see any indication there that the Percy Jackson movies ever existed? No. No, you do not. In his blog post, he also does mention that he is grateful for the movies for bringing a lot of people over to the book series. He doesn't in any way deny the fact that the movies definitely opened up the book series to a whole wider audience, and that is generally a good thing. So at least one good thing came out of the movies. He doesn't fully pretend that the movies don't exist, and he doesn't refuse to acknowledge the fact that the movies were beneficial to the book sales. He does understand that the movies did help bring a lot of people into the books, and those people are probably still a part of the fandom now. So the rest of his blog post are emails that he has sent to producers of the Lightning Thief movie. In January of 2009, he wrote a note to the producers, and his very first issue that he addressed was the aging of the characters in the movie and how they decided to age them up to 17. For reference, in his blog post, he blanks out the person's name. That's what a bunch of the X's are. He says, "I understand that a decision has been made to age the main characters in the film to 17. As no one wants to see this film succeed more than I do, I hope you let me share a couple of reasons why this is a bad idea from a money-making point of view. First, it kills any possibility of a movie franchise. I don't know if you or your staff have had the chance to read further than The Lightning Thief in the Percy Jackson series, but there are 4 other volumes. The series is grounded on the premise that Percy must progress from age 12 to age 16, when according to a prophecy, he must make a decision that saves or destroys the world. I assume that Blank would at least like to keep open the option of sequels, assuming the first movie does well. Starting Percy at 17 makes this undoable. I'm also sure that for the first Harry Potter movie, some in the studio argued for making the characters older to appeal to a teen audience. Fortunately, they took the long view and stayed true to the source material, which allowed them to grow a lucrative franchise. This would have been impossible if they started Harry at 17. The same principle applies here." He continues to say, "Secondly, it alienates the core audience. I'm guessing those book sale numbers are important to Blank because you're hoping all those kids will show up at the theater. The core readership for Percy Jackson is age 9 to 12. There are roughly 1 million kids that age, plus their families, who are dying to see this film because they want to see the pictures in their imagination brought to life. Many of these kids have read the books multiple times and know every detail. They are keenly aware that Percy is 12 in the first book. By making the character 17, you've lost those kids as soon as they see the first movie trailer. You signal that this is a teen film when the core audience is families. I understand that you want to appeal to teens because they are a powerful demographic, and conventional wisdom says that teens will not see movies about younger kids than themselves. Harry Potter proved this wrong, but aside from that, deviating so significantly from the source material risks pleasing no one. Teens who know the books are meant for younger kids, and the younger kids who will be angry and disappointed that the books they love have been distorted to a teen movie. I haven't even seen the script yet, so I don't know how much of the story has changed, but I fear the movie will be dead on arrival with the 17-year-old lead." At this point in time in the production process, Rick had no idea who they were planning on casting for any of the roles. He just knew that they were planning to age them up to 17. He finishes his note by saying, "I've spent the last 4 years touring the country talking about the movie. I've seen hundreds of thousands of kids. They are all excited about the movie, but they are also anxious. Most of these kids have no idea which studio produces the film, but everywhere I go, they say the same thing. Please don't let them do to The Lightning Thief what they did to Blank. Fill in another movie from the same producers. Don't let them change the story. These kids are the seed audience for the movie. They are the ones who will show up first with their families, then tell their friends to go, or not go, depending on how they liked it. They are looking for one thing: how faithful was the movie to the book? Make Percy 17 and that battle is lost before filming even begins. Thanks for letting me say my piece. I care too much about the project to see it fail." So that was in January of 2009. Fast forward a little bit to March of 2009. At this point, Rick has been able to see the script. I'm not sure what version of the script he got to see. I'm assuming it was a pretty early version of the script though, which is interesting because recently on Twitter, the first draft of the Lightning Thief movie script has actually been going around. I think I read the first page and it was a tough read. I think it'd be really interesting to read the script and I guess kind of react to it at the same time. But read the script for a YouTube video and talk about it and dissect it. I think that that'd be a really interesting video. So let me know if you want to see me read the first script of the Lightning Thief movie. But so fast forward to March 2009, Rick has read the script for the movie and he sends another email to the producers. One thing I really like about getting able to read these emails is that you can really tell how much of Rick himself is put into Percy Jackson as a character, because Rick is honestly kind of really sassy in these emails. I don't know if he's trying to, but he does kinda eat up the producers of the movie. So this is his email to them in March of 2009. Thank you for letting me look at the script. It's very important to me that the movie does well. I also take my role seriously as an advocate for fans of the book who have been pleading with me for 4 years. Please don't let them change the story. In my view, the two go together. When I look at the children's books that have been made into movies over the past few years, I see a direct correlation between how faithful an adaptation is and how well it does at the box office. I'm not sure if the movie industry sees this connection as they keep making the same mistakes over and over again, but it's pretty clear to me and the young readers I talk to every day. He starts out his email with talking about the positives of the script, the things he likes, which I feel like is something a lot of people don't know about. They just assume Rick hated absolutely everything about the movies, but that's actually not true. He goes, there are things I like about this adaptation. The beginning works well, the opening scenes do a good job getting into the story quickly and setting up the characters. The first part of the story has been made more economical, but it is more or less faithful to the spirit of the book, which I agree with. I think the opening to The Lightning Thief is a great opening to a movie. Like, it moves fast, it flows well, the opening is good. I remember when I watched the movie for the first time being like, okay, yeah, the opening is good. And then like the minute they got to Camp Half-Blood, I was like, whoa, wait a minute. We're not in the book anymore. Rick continues by saying, the scene with the Minotaur is nicely crafted. I liked the Minotaur appearing out of the field of cows. The gate with words that rearranged themselves as Camp Half-Blood was a nice touch. He says Annabeth's first appearance was good. I like how she's been made a more physically challenging rival for Percy. He also says the scene in Las Vegas is mostly good. I have a few suggestions on that, but they are easy changes. I like the entrance to the underworld being at the Hollywood sign. And he says the way Gabe is petrified at the end makes sense, and the idea of the heroes toting Blank's head across country makes me chuckle. So, contrary to popular belief, Rick was actually fine with some of the changes that the movie made from the book. People who don't like the Percy Jackson show love to use Rick's disliking of the movies as an excuse to call him a hypocrite and say that he shouldn't have made changes in the show because he critiques the movies for making changes from the book. But the changes that were being made weren't the entire issue for Rick, and I feel like a lot of people don't get that. It was less the changes that the movie was making and more of how he was treated during the process of writing this movie. He continues his email by saying, having said that, here's the bad news. The script as a whole is terrible. I don't simply mean that it deviates from the book, though certainly it does that to a point of being almost unrecognizable as the same story. Fans of the book will be angry and disappointed. They will leave the theater in droves and generate horrible word of mouth. That is an absolute given if the script goes forward as it stands now. But the bigger problem is that even if you pretend the book doesn't exist, this script doesn't work as a story in its own right. The good news, it is eminently fixable. When I first read the script, I'll admit I was plunged into despair at just how bad it was. If I were intentionally trying to sabotage this project, I doubt I could have done a better job than the script. That's crazy to say. But as I began to make notes and look specifically at what was bothering me, I realized that the script could be made palatable to fans and the general moviegoing audience without really changing its present scene structure, lengthening the script, or adding new sets that would increase the budget. I'm choosing to take heart in your assurance that this script is not finished. That is one thing we can agree on. It needs help. So then he goes on to explain to the producers what his main issues with the script are. He breaks them down into 3 categories: age appropriateness, structure, and the writing. So he starts out with age-appropriate content. He says this is the easiest fix, but an important one. The Percy books are family-oriented. They are read primarily by children ages 9 to 12. You will have, I hope, a large number of parents bringing their 9 to 12-year-old children to this movie, expecting to see something appropriate for that age range. As one of those parents, I would walk my kids right out of the cinema if the movie included some of the language and content presently in the script. I don't mind being a little submersive and pushing boundaries, but there's nothing radical, fresh, or interesting about biatch, ass, or shit. It's a lazy attempt to make the script seem hip to teens, but such language has been overused to the point that it doesn't even rate a cheap laugh anymore. If you go this route, you lose the entire demographic of families with younger children. School groups who otherwise would take field trips to see this movie will stay away en masse. Neither do I believe you have to have cliche, crude language and gutter humor to engage a teen audience if you have a script that is funny, fresh, and original. As it is, the script will offend the parents of younger children and alienate what should be its core audience while gaining nothing. I'm talking with 4th and 5th graders all the time about this upcoming movie. I would be horrified if I steered them into a movie with this kind of content. I wouldn't see it. I wouldn't let my kids see it. I wouldn't recommend anyone else see it. and I certainly wouldn't want my name associated with it. Please do not sex up my children's story. If you take out all the lines I flagged and put in something funnier and fresher, but not blatantly crude, you will have a much stronger script with a wider appeal. I think that that's an extremely valid critique to have, especially when you're the writer. Like, we can all agree, whether you like or dislike the Lightning Thief movie, it is a little odd seeing like Percy and Annabeth aged up and their whole point kind of just being whether or not they're attracted to each other. I think that the way it's done in the show works 10 times better. Not to mention, I feel like, no offense to Logan Lerman or Alexandra Daddario, I don't really feel like they had any chemistry in the movie, so it's really hard when you have like a script that revolve around these two characters having, I guess, sexual tension is what they were going for, and these two characters don't have any sort of like romantic or sexual tension. Which is also crazy because Logan Lerman and Alexandra Daddario started dating while The Lightning Thief was filming, and they still had no chemistry on screen. That's crazy. The next big point that Rick wants to talk about is structure, and he starts out this segment by saying, I have no problem with changes for the sake of streamlining. I feel like that is a super important thing, and I feel like every TikTok Percy Jackson fan needs to read that. They need to absorb it. They need to tattoo it on their eyelids if they have to. I don't care. I just feel like everyone who called Rick a hypocrite for changing things in the show need to understand that he was never against changing things from his book. As long as like the overall story stayed true. I just want to show that to everybody who is like, Rick's a hypocrite for changing things in the show when he's been judging the movie for doing that all this time. Because like we already established, there are some things that they changed that he likes and he was fine with. And he gets into some more examples here. He says, I also understand the need to limit the number of sets to stay within budget. The script does this well in many places. You've cut the Oracle at Delphi, Dionysus, the search for Pan, Clarice. I could go on, but those changes don't upset me because they don't affect the story's core. I feel like that's important when it comes to looking at the changes that were made in the TV show. Does it affect the story's core? No. He then continues by saying, I'm not so understanding of adding scenes and plot lines that are completely foreign to the book and make the story read like an illogical hatchet job. And then he goes on to list some specific examples. The first example he lists is Persephone's pearls, which if you haven't watched the Percy Jackson movie, or if it's been a while since you watched it, basically they made it a plot point that Percy and Annabeth and Grover had to go across the country to specific places to collect these pearls that belong to Persephone. Those places were like Antiums, Parthenon, and Las Vegas. But they added this whole weird plot to the movie of like Percy has to go across the country to collect these pearls for when he gets to LA, which was like kind of a weird thing to add. And Rick gets into that in his blog post. He says, Persephone's pearls, a truly bad plot device. In the original, Percy must go across country because he cannot fly, as Zeus would zap him out of the sky. He's got a timer, the summer solstice. He's got double motivation to find his mother and to find Hades, who supposedly has the lightning bolt. He's got a goal, Los Angeles. This gives him plenty of reason to go to the underworld without tagging on some superficial quest for pearls that don't have any basis in Greek mythology. This is the point where the script takes a hard left turn into weird. The story ceases to be The Lightning Thief, and it will have fans squirming in their seats and demanding a refund. Which I agree with. I rewatched The Lightning Thief for like the first time in like 2021, I want to say. I think I watched it when it came out in theaters, or at least I watched it when it was like on digital, but I have a really bad memory. I have the memory of a goldfish. So sometimes when I haven't revisited something in like over 10 years, I might as well be watching it again for the first time, which is what it felt like when I was watching The Lightning Thief. And I remember being like, whoa, what is going on? Like, from the minute they leave Camp Half-Blood, I remember texting my best friend Jenna and being like, what is going on? I was texting my boyfriend Chris, and I was like, this is not the book. This is crazy. How did this get approved? So I fully agree with Rick that, like, the whole Persephone Pearls plotline is where the movie kind of takes a really hard, like, deviation from the books. You know that meme of a car like on a highway and it could be going straight, but then like last minute it's taking like a really sharp right turn on an exit? That's like what that part of the movie feels like. It could keep going with the book, but instead it goes into just like a weird place that's not The Lightning Thief anymore. The next example that Rick talks about is the whole Nashville thing, the Parthenon, the Hydra, all that stuff. He says, Nashville, the Hydra, battle bugs. This entire scene is awful and completely alien to the story. I'm guessing it was added because the set is easier to make than, say, the St. Louis Arch, or you're thinking the Hydra is more recognizable than the Chimera. Again, this is a place where you will lose the readers of the book in droves for no good reason, but I think it could easily be fixed. It could also be a place to insert Ares. As you've mentioned, you're interested in that. I've given my ideas for this below in the page-by-page critique, which I agree when it comes to the Parthenon scene in the movie. I think they definitely did that just because I think the Parthenon is a more recognizable thing in Greek mythology in general. It's an iconic thing in Nashville. I've been. Great times. And also I do think that they probably thought that the Hydra was way more recognizable than the Chimera because it is. The Hydra is in a whole bunch of stuff like Hercules, for example. So I get why they did that, but I agree that scene in the movie feels kind of messy and out of place and just weird. Next, Rick talks about Luke. He says, in the original, Luke is a rival for Annabeth's affections. He's older, good-looking, cool, and suave, with an important backstory. In this script, Luke has become a sniveling little slime ball. This A, takes away a great source of romantic tension, B, makes it much too obvious that Luke is the villain, and C, destroys the series' storyline, in which Luke becomes Percy's archenemy and eventually morphs into Kronos. And D, makes the script ending anticlimactic. I don't think it's a bad idea to have a fight with Luke at the end, though I still think it's not nearly as exciting as fighting with Ares. But if you have a fight with Luke, he should be an attractive, powerful enemy who wants to see our hero fight a little creep. Why is that exciting? So I think it's clear that Rick absolutely hated how they wrote Luke in the movie. And to be fair, I definitely agree with the take that it's a little too obvious that Luke is the villain. I think it's obvious to people regardless because not only have we read the books, so we know Luke is the villain, but you would have to be, I think, completely devoid of media literacy to not pick up on, like, Luke being a little suspicious. But I did see people on TikTok who were watching the show for the very first time, non-book readers, non-movie watchers, and they were expecting anybody but Luke to be the one that portrays Percy. They were expecting Annabeth. They were expecting Sally Jackson, Percy's mother, to be the one that portrays him before they were expecting Luke. And I think a big part of that is because they casted Charlie Bushnell, who is relatively attractive. His charm and suave and like attractiveness was able to sort of distract people from the fact that he was the villain. So I think they were definitely more successful in the show at hiding, I guess, that Luke was the villain. I also think it's really interesting that he says in this part of his email that he thinks it's interesting to have Percy have a fight with Luke because that's something that they added to the show. In the book, it's just sort of Luke and Percy talking and Luke sicks a scorpion onto Percy and that's the end of that. But in the show, they made it so that Luke and Percy are fighting and I thought that that was a really great addition to the show. So this is just another example of how Rick is not fully against things being changed from his book when they make sense and when they are beneficial to the story. Next, Rick talks about Persephone. He says, talk about Deus Ex Machina. She had no part in the original and has been added to patch up a storyline that no longer makes sense. The ending now, with Grover getting out of the underworld off stage, has no tension and no believability. I would strongly encourage you to restore the mystery of the original plot. Percy believes Hades has the lightning bolt, and he discovers along the way that this cannot be true, which leads him to the realization that they've all been played by Ares. Again, I've put my specific suggestions below, which I fully agree with. One of my least favorite things about the movie is as much as I like Rosario Dawson, Persephone doesn't need to be in this movie. Persephone being in the underworld at this point in time does not make sense. It's summertime. She doesn't stay in the underworld during the summer. She's above ground during the summer. So not only from like a Greek mythological standpoint does it not make sense for her to be there in this movie, the only reason that she's there is because of the plot that they added about Persephone's pearls, which was added for no reason. So then Persephone being there just doesn't really make any sense. It's just a whole mess. A whole mess that I just quite don't like. The next point he makes is about Kronos. He says, this is rather important if you want to preserve the possibility of a franchise, as Kronos is the master villain in the series. Having said that, I can see making a script that works with only a passing mention of Kronos, but at the very least, it should be Ares manipulating Luke. And there should be some question at the end of the book. Why would Ares do this? Was he working alone? This would at least leave some opening to introduce Kronos later. So I guess the original script didn't have any mention of Kronos. I can't remember if the movie ends up mentioning Kronos at all. I know in Sea of Monsters, Kronos is there because they like speed run the end of the movie and combine like the following 3 books into the film and they make Kronos show up at a theme park, ? But I can't remember if the Lightning Thief mentions Kronos at all. Lastly, Rick mentions specifically the fight with Ares. He says, honestly, this is the best, most cinematic scene in the book. It's a crime to exclude it from the movie, and Ares is the best adult role in the story. I wholeheartedly agree. The exclusion of Ares in the movie, I think, was one of the worst decisions that they could have made. I think it would have been easy to include him. They didn't include him because they wanted to, for some reason, have this plot with Persephone and her pearls. I don't get it. But I think that excluding Ares from the movie was a real big mistake. And I think that Ares in the Percy Jackson show is like one of the best parts of the show, if not the best part of the show. Like both episode 5 and episode 8 include Ares, and in my opinion, those 2 episodes are some of the best episodes of the show. He's very vital, in my opinion, to the first story, so I just think it's crazy that the movie just decided, we don't need him. Rick finishes out his point by saying, you mentioned that the script is still being revised for logic and motivation, and I can understand why. The plot has been chopped up so thoroughly that it no longer holds together. As I said, I think this could be fixed without radically changing the scene structure that you've developed, and it would take better writing by someone who understands the story, which brings me to my last point, the writing. He says, the dialogue needs to sparkle. I'd like to see it be fresh and original and funny. Right now, there are some good areas, but mostly it is flat, tired, and uninspired. It's certainly not funny. I'm not expecting lines to be lifted from the book verbatim, but it would be nice if they resembled the source material, at least in tone and spirit. This is another thing that I think is really important for people to see Rick say, because when the show came out, certain lines would be like skipped over from the book and people would be so mad about it. I remember people being mostly mad about a line that happens when they're in the underworld. I think Percy says something about a bathtub. I can't remember what the exact line is. I'm sure some of you remember what it is, but I remember people being really mad that Percy didn't have his line, but what Percy says was still funny. He's like, we're all dying, if you think about it, or something like that. I remember it still being funny. So like the specific complaint about an exact line not being lifted out of the book, I always thought was a weird complaint for people to have. I understand if it's your favorite line that didn't make it into the show, but I do still think that the general Percy Jackson humor was there, and I think that that was very evident and consistent throughout the scripts of the show. I think Percy was very funny and he was very sassy. So I think they achieved the tone and the spirit of the books in the show. Rick continues by saying, one of the things that defines Percy is his sense of humor. He doesn't have one in the script. When Blank first acquired the book, I was told one of the main selling points was the humor. Why then do we want to settle for a script that is completely devoid of the story's trademark humor? There is no heart or soul to the story. The only motivator seems to be sex. Will Percy and Annabeth get together? That's A, not enough, and B, not done very well. He then goes into specifically unpacking the writing of certain characters. Starting with Percy, he says Percy should doubt himself. He's conflicted about his father, he shows resentment towards the gods and his dad, but finally has reconciliation and realizes that he is different than Luke. He can rise above his anger and become a hero, accept his parents even if they are not perfect. There needs to be a message here about what it takes to become a hero. There is only the tiniest hint of this in the script, and it's not nearly powerful enough. On the romantic front, Percy is attracted to Annabeth, but she also intimidates him and annoys him at times. He's not completely driven by hormones to get the girl, as he is in this script. Their relationship needs to be more nuanced. I think every point that he made there about Percy is something that they successfully achieved in the show script, specifically the part of like Percy showing resentment towards the gods and how he's conflicted about his dad. Those are things that Percy definitely goes through in the show, and it's very evident that he goes through that in the show. And then the whole concept of he does like doubt himself, and he like can kind of see where Luke is coming from, but he decides to like rise above that, and he does accept his dad for like what he is. He understands that the gods aren't perfect, but he's not willing to go down the path that Luke is going down. I think all of that is super evident in the script of the show, and they did that really well. I think that the whole dynamic between Luke and Percy is actually one of the things that the show did best, in my opinion, because they changed and added things like Luke showing Percy around camp, and they added Hermes, and they had Hermes talk about Luke. They added all these things that I think really built Luke's character in the show, and that really helped drive the point home at the end about Luke and Percy having things in common, but Percy decides to go down a different path than Luke. So I think the show did a great job at doing all the things that Rick just mentioned when it comes to Percy. Next, he talks about Annabeth. She's meant to have a backstory with Luke. She is conflicted about her feelings towards Percy because of this. Their romance in the script is too obvious, too quick, and not nearly interesting enough. Where is the tension, the doubt, the conflict? And in terms of the series arc, getting them together in the first installment throws out 4 more books worth of character development. It would be much better if they kiss at the end, but it's still very unclear whether they're actually together. It should be more of a tease. I think it's interesting that his critiques on Annabeth all relate to her romantic relationship with Percy, because genuinely in the movie, I feel like that's what Annabeth was reduced down to. Like, she has some moments where she's a good fighter and whatnot, and we see that because in the first movie, Annabeth is technically a mixture of Annabeth and Clarice. But once they leave Camp Half-Blood and start going on their trip, if you will, I feel like Annabeth is mostly reduced to a love interest. She is mostly reduced to somebody that is there for Percy to have a crush on. And I love Alexandra Daddario. I think that she is a great Annabeth, but I think that the script that she was given was just awful and not anything like Annabeth is supposed to be. I think it's obvious, goes without saying, that the script that Leah got for Annabeth 10 times better. And I know that some people feel like Annabeth in the show is not book Annabeth at all. I disagree with that take, but to each their own. But I think that regardless of if you think Annabeth in the show is like book Annabeth, I do think that show Annabeth got a better script than movie Annabeth, for sure, without a doubt. Next, he talks about Grover. He says Grover has become a cipher in the script. All he cares about is sex. There's a passing reference to his need to earn his stripes, but it never feels real, and Grover never seems worried about it. If you take out the entire subplot about Pan, okay, but Grover needs to have something more serious on the line. For instance, his reputation and his backstory, having failed once before as Luke and Annabeth's protector. Percy's quest is his shot at redemption. This would only take a few lines to develop, and it would make the character more than simply comic relief. Which is very true. Grover in the movies is just comic relief and is so different from Grover in the books. I think show Grover is also written very differently from Grover in the books, but I think it's done in a far more positive way than the movie is. In the show, I feel like Grover is just more confident in himself, which I think is a perfectly fine change to make. He's just a little bit less anxious than he is in the books. In the movies, Grover might as well just be a whole different character. Like, there's really nothing that roots him to his original book characteristics. Movie Grover is always just like trying to go flirt with the girls in the Aphrodite cabin, and like when they get to Las Vegas, he's just hanging out with a bunch of girls, and it's just very much, in the movie, Grover is just very much made to be a womanizer. And although he probably is the funniest part of the movie, like, I will say that, if I take a step back out of the Percy Jackson fan mindset and I just watched The Lightning Thief as a movie, I will agree that Grover is most of the comic relief in the movie. And I do find him funny, like, from an objective standpoint. Like, yeah, there's definitely some lines where I chuckle. I think the actor has good comedic delivery. So I'm not saying that he's not necessarily unfunny. I'm just saying that, like, the way that the movie wrote Grover is so far from Grover's real and true characteristics that it's just not really Grover. Doesn't mean he's not funny, but just not Grover to me. Yeah! Rick closes out this email by saying, "If you find my comments have merit, I'd be happy to revise the script myself, which you could then take or leave as you please. I could do this without changing the number of scenes or the length of the script, and if necessary, I will set everything aside to turn this around quickly. My main focus would be freshening up the dialogue, adding Percy brand humor, and trying to tighten up the logic of the plot while keeping it simple. Note that my rough suggestions for the substitute lines below are just that, rough. I would take care to make the wording punchier and more economical. At the very least, please address my concerns and get another writer who has actually read the book and can make the necessary changes, but at this point, I really don't trust anyone but myself to do it correctly. If the script goes forward in its present form, I don't need to be the Oracle of Delphi to foresee what will happen. You will lose the fans of the series 100%, but more importantly, the script will fail to impress even regular moviegoers who haven't read the book. The movie will become another statistic in a long line of failed movies badly adapted from children's books. No one wants that, and a year from now, I really would prefer not to be saying, 'I told you so.'" This email that he sent to the producer was followed by 12 pages of notes going through the script line by line, and they did not accept Rick's offer to rework the script. I do really wish that Rick included his 12 specific, like, page by page, line by line notes. I would love to read those to know what exactly he liked and didn't like, but I guess we'll never know. So that is Rick's blog post when it comes to talking about the movie and how much he was involved. Like I said earlier, I think it's so fascinating to see what changes he liked and what changes he didn't like and why. And I think it's really interesting that a lot of people like to create this narrative that Rick doesn't want anything from his books to be changed and that's why he hates the movies, when that's genuinely not the case. He doesn't like the movies and he says things like normalize bad movie erasure because he was treated horribly throughout the process of writing this movie. Like, they didn't care for his critiques at all in the slightest. And they paid for it, clearly. The movies didn't do well. And also, like, when you look at the differences between what the movie changed and what the show changed, the movie was changing things just to make it, like he said, a sort of sexed up version of his children's story, which as an author has to be so heartbreaking to see, because it's true, whether you like the Lightning Thief movie or not, it is a little bit horned up, if you will. Yes, it can be a fun movie, but it does kind of trade in the magic of Percy Jackson for the romantic side of Percy Jackson, which is like sad. Something they could have done maybe in the 4th or 5th movie if they stuck to the right ages, but they didn't. And it's so crazy to think about what could have been if the movie listened to Rick's critiques seriously and took his critiques into account. That would be an alternate universe that I would like to see. I would love to see an alternate universe where the Percy Jackson movies were accurate and done well and were successful, just to see like what society would look like. I feel like that'd be really interesting. But yeah, one of the main reasons that I wanted to make this video is because I feel like I've seen a lot of people calling Rick a hypocrite because they're like, oh, we were promised a book accurate adaptation of this book and Rick didn't even give us that. He's a hypocrite. He changed things in the show when he bashes on the movies for changing things from his book. And it's like, that's not really true. He bashes the movie for certain things, but as we see in this blog post, there's also certain things that he didn't mind them changing. He admits himself he's fine with changes being made if it's for the benefit of like the streamlining of the story, which I think most of the changes done in the show are done for the sake of streamlining, so it makes sense that he's fine with those changes. He was also fine with the general idea of changing the St. Louis Arch to the Parthenon. It was just the things within that scene that he wanted changed. Or things like the addition of Persephone's pearls. It's not so much the fact that they were adding something, it's more or less that what they were adding didn't make sense and didn't really have any basis in Greek mythology. But if you look at the show, the changing of the Tunnel of Love, at least that has some sort of basis in Greek mythology. So I think that this blog post is honestly very eye-opening. I know I felt very eye-opened when I read it for the first time, and I think it really shows and explains like why Rick doesn't like these movies. He's never even seen them. Or so he says. And it makes me really sad to think about the fact that the creator of these stories, the author of these books, did everything he could to try and help this movie succeed. And what was for 10 years like the only adaptation of his beloved book series, book franchise, was a crappy adaptation. It makes me sad to think that he had to sit on this for like 10 years, more than 10 years, and be like, my books got adapted poorly because they weren't listening to what I was trying to say. They didn't take any of my ideas into account. And because of that, my book series got a bad adaptation. And at this time, in 2018, he didn't know or think that there was going to be a new Percy Jackson adaptation. So sitting on something like that for 10 years can really help explain why he has such a strong disliking for the movies. I don't blame him for disliking the movies at all. And I am really happy to see how happy he is with the show. I think that even if you don't like the show, if you're a fan of the book series and if you're a fan of Rick Riordan, you can take a step back from the fact that you don't like the show. Just take a step back and look at Rick. And I think you can at least be happy for him that he is happy with the adaptation his books are getting. Like, even if you may not like it, you should feel at least some sort of happiness for the writer because he is happy with what is being made, which I think is super important. But I think that about does it for this video. Thank you guys for watching. I hope you enjoyed me breaking down this blog post. Like I said, I will link the blog post in the description for this YouTube video down below so you can go and read the whole thing for yourself. Even though I pretty much read the whole thing, go ahead and go read through it. Also, comment down below, let me know if you want me to read the first script for the Lightning Thief movie It's awful. I'm gonna be honest with you, from what I've seen so far, the script is pretty awful, so I think that that'd be super, super funny. Make sure you follow me on all my other social medias, including my Patreon. Make sure you go and check that out. For those of you that don't know, I also have a podcast that I do with my boyfriend where we talk about all things pop culture, so go check that out as well. But other than that, that does it for this video. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all next time. Bye.